before even starting talking about the lecture, I just would like to remind you of this fact, the fact that our discourse analysis, our course which is discourse analysis, is taken in a way or another from a social, cultural viewpoint. In other words, we couldn't deal with any abstract language as something abstract because it has something to do with the society. It has something to do with the culture. How I view the language I read, how I understand the language I hear, depends to a great extent on my knowledge about the society and about the culture in which that language is used. So I think it is right that some linguists say that a language could not be obtained but in its social context. In other words, the knowledge about the social context, the knowledge about the culture of the people helps to a great extent in knowing and understanding what you hear from them and what you read from them. I will refer back a little bit to the example that I have already given to you, the example of the coffee, and how coffee could be viewed in two different ways depending on the word used. If I use mop, what it might mean, and if I use another word, what I might imagine, whether I'm talking about the coffee, which is the liquid, or the coffee as grains that I just want to get rid of, but it is not a liquid or something liquid. Now, words like work and coffee seem to have more general meanings. Work, the word work, has a general meaning. The word coffee has a general meaning than are apparent in the source of situated meanings we have discussed so far. The situated meaning I mean here is once we talked about coffee and how we can talk about two different people, two different individuals who can imagine the word coffee sometimes as grains, sometimes as something liquid to drink, depending on the words are used in that context. But the word coffee has indeed more general meaning, like the word work. This is because words are also associated with what? In chapter 3 and 4, G called cultural models. In any society, we have a cultural model that came to light depending on our experience in life. So, if I say the word coffee, for example, in the country where coffee is found, in countries from which I take coffee, I get coffee to my country, it might have different meanings, different dimensions, because of the cultural model found in there. They are the people who pick up the coffee from trees, for example. For them, the word coffee might mean a tree from which that material or substance is taken. But for me, if I'm living in this country, for us, we just bring coffees from these countries, and culturally speaking, it has some meaning that differs from the meanings found in the country from which I get the coffee itself. In other words, cultural models means something we agree upon to mean something by the society. We have a society, it has members, those members have habitual contact, their own experience that lead by the passing of days to give some meanings to some words till it becomes a model. Cultural models. Cultural models are what? The definition is very much important. Cultural models are storylines, families of connected images. Storylines, as if I have a story, for example, talked about 100 years ago, and then I inherited that story, or my father inherited that story from his father, and then I inherited that story from my father. In other words, I'm talking about a line that started from the past till it reaches the future, and I have some meanings for some words, for some aspects, for some scenes, for some images, but we agreed that these means so and so because we inherited the meaning from our previous experience, from our previous life. In other words, I'm talking about culture. Culture doesn't emerge overnight. Culture indeed is something which is built over years. So cultural models, the models that I adopt to judge upon, are storylines, families of connected images, like a mental movie, or informal theories. They are theories, but they are not written, but we agree upon because we inherited that from our grandfathers, from our fathers, and so on and so forth. Shared by people. All of us agree that that means so and so. We agree that this is right, this is wrong. That means so, but that doesn't mean so. In other words, theories shared by people belonging to specific social or cultural groups. We're talking about a group of people who have some values, who have some beliefs, who have some, let me say, culture, some meanings for something. So cultural models are storylines, families of connected images, or theories shared by people belonging to specific social or cultural groups. Why I say belonging to? Because if I don't belong to that society, I do not have the experience they have, and so I might not be able to understand some situation because indeed they have, let me say, some values about that. They have some meanings, certain meanings about that situation, and as I do not have habitual contact with them, I don't know what is going on in that society between the members of that society. Theories shared by people belonging to specific social or cultural group. The definition is what is important. Indeed, cultural models explain relative to the standards, as if they are standards, and you know what we mean by standard. If I say standard language, this means that this is the best dialect upon which I judge the rest of the dialects, which is whether they are correct or they are not. Standard model, it is a model, the model that is found in a given society. Okay, cultural models explain relative to the standards of the group. Why words have the various situated meanings? Why the word coffee means that thing in that situation, but it doesn't mean that thing in another situation. This is taken from the cultural models. For example, in that culture, we have some values, some meanings for something. We use some materials in order to clean something, but in another society, they might use another thing to clean the same thing. So cultural models explain relative to the standards of the group. Why words have the various situated meanings they do and fuel their ability to grow more. Cultural models are usually not completely stored in anyone's person's head. No, they are not stored in our minds. Indeed, rather, they are distributed across the different sources of expertise and viewpoints found in the group. In other words, it is not in my mind. They are bits found in the mind of this person and the mind of this person or that member of the society, much like a plot to a story or pieces of a puzzle that different people have different bits of, and which they can potentially share in order to mutually develop the big picture. As if we're talking about a society, we have members, each member has part of the general picture, we gathered all of these bits, and we then can have the biggest picture, the larger picture for the situation, for the scene. So all of us work together, all of us cooperate with one another in order to reach the conclusion, how we can view that situation, how we can reach that situated meaning, for example. The cultural model connected to coffee, for example, is for some of us something like berries are picked and then prepared as beans or grain to be made later into a drink. The culture of the society I live in will help me understand what exactly I mean by the word coffee if it is used. Different types of coffee drunk in different ways have different social and cultural implications. For example, the use of coffee in some societies, in some cultures, might mean something that do not mean the same thing in other countries. For example, in some countries, drinking coffee might mean acceptance. If I ask you to do me a favor, and I might say, I will not drink your coffee unless you say you are going to do it, this is part of my culture. But if I do that in Europe, it would not be understood, because we are talking about a cultural model which is different, or that are different. So in each society, we have our own cultural model that take us, that we have to follow. So different types of coffee drunk in different ways have different social and cultural implications, for example, in terms of status. This is about all of the model I know. I refers to, of course, to G. Cultural models link to each other in complex ways to create bigger and bigger storylines. Such linked networks of cultural models help organize the thinking and social practices of socio-cultural groups. In other words, that cultural models, that storylines help us understand a given situation, help us understand what is said in other words, what is read in other words. The model I have in my mind, the cultural model I have in my mind, not only help me understand the behavior of the people, the meanings of the words that might be used, it could be also used in order to analyze. This is the crucial point that you have to keep in mind. For example, taking a more consequential example than coffee, as we saw in chapter 4, some people use a cultural model for raising young children. That runs something like this. Children are born dependent. This is something cultural. We have in mind that children are born, for example, being dependent on our parents or on their parents. One of the values, one of the cultural models we have in our societies, that we have to raise our children in a way or another to make them reach a point where they can be independent. This is part of our culture, that our children one day, they have to depend on themselves. So, if I know this cultural model, I will know then why fathers deal with their children in that way. Chapter 4, some people use a cultural model for raising young children that runs something like this. Children are born dependent on their parents, and then they go through various stages during which they often engage in disruptive behaviors in pursuit of their growing desire for independence. So independence is an aim, but I know that it is an aim because I live in that society. This cultural model, which integrates models for children, different models, child rearing, stages, development, and independence, as well as others, helps parents explain their children's behavior. I can understand my children's behavior if I understand these models, why they behave in that way. Having this background will help me understand why my children behave in that way. It is continually revised and developed in interaction with others in the group, as well as through exposure to various books and other materials, other media, sorry. As I told you, the most important points is what I have just summarized. If you go back to them and you read them, if you find yourself unable to understand some of the points I have mentioned, my summary will help you understand it. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much.